Okay, welcome to the SIG CLI meeting. It's March 28th, and we're starting. So a quick announcement, 1.10 was released earlier this week. Congratulations to everyone involved. That was super awesome, and 1.10 is packed with features. So once again, congratulations. And let's move on to the topics. The first person will be Paris with updates on the contracts. The floor is yours, Paris.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, I am the co-chair of Contributor Experience. What we're doing right now is a little bit of a roadshow, going around to all of the SIGs and letting them know, letting you all know that we're working on some really important things and how to get involved and really just communicate better out from our wider contributor experience audience and to other folks that we may not interface on a regular basis with. I did drop the notes in the chat as well as the agenda. So I'm not going to read all of this, nor am I going to go over it. It's 3 pages worth of notes, but this is really what we've been working on in the last 3 months. But I wanted to go over very quickly some of the highlights of that and see if I could get some feedback from you, and not necessarily now either, because we probably won't have time for that, but really just open the door for feedback and see what you think about some of the things that we've been working on. First, this year, one of our main missions is to make sure that contributors are having a similar experience across repos. That's very important for us because we hear a lot of feedback from not only just new contributors, but current contributors that different repos have different workflows, and those repos are included in Kubernetes in the organization. So we're just trying to make it so that there's one single source of truth for contributor guide related items. And some of those things are, for instance, the new stale issues bot, label definitions, what does LGTM mean to you explicitly, and then also adding other labels like help wanted, good first time issue. And the links, again, are in the agenda for today, so you can give feedback on some of those firsthand in those issues. People have asked a lot of our group as far as can you turn this one bot off for this repo, or can you turn labels on in this way for our repo, and this is why, again, just because we want to give contributors a very similar experience across the board, so that they don't have to go fish for your own contributor guide and things like that. But if you do have your own contributor guide, that's fine, but we should be at least linking that into the main source of truth as far as what your guide is, how your guide is different versus not. We've also been working on some issue triage and issue management related things, and we wanted to see what your thoughts were on applying the current issue triage guidelines that we have across all Kubernetes GitHub repos. Again, link is in the agenda for feedback there. And then more importantly, how do you find out about these changes? Again, this is one of the main reasons why we're doing this roadshow. And we've actually defined that in our charter now. One, we're going to be lazy consensusing with a time box of at least 72 hours to both all these mailing lists that I'm about to say, and then also with a GitHub issue link. And that's going to go to contributor experience email distro. It's also going to go to the SIG leads email distro, and then also the Kubernetes development email distro. And then we are going to be starting to announce these major changes at the community meetings on Thursday in the announcement section. It's very important. So if you do want to know these things, that those are the areas that you should be following. And on that same topic, charter, we did define our charter. We do need to update it because we are now following the guidance that the steering committee had proposed with the words chair versus lead and technical lead. And then we also are defining our sub-project owners. I still need to do a poll against that, but our old charter is linked in the meeting agenda. I don't think you need any help with your charter, but if you do, we're here to help you. And then on the same topic of contributors having the same experience, we do have a new version of the contributor guide, thanks to George Castro, Gwyn, Tim Pepper, and several others. And if you could review and make comments and post holes, that would be awesome for us, because this is the only way we're going to get in a single point of truth contributor guide. We're also now underway for the developer guide portion of that, which is something that we've heard definitely needs to be reworked and things like that. So the issue link is in the agenda today. So if you could maybe let us know what we should definitely be adding, maybe like from fresh documentation standpoint, or updates to documentation that we have that are just stale. Let us know that as well. We hope to have something out within the next 3 months as far as a first shot at that. And then the next thing that I wanted to talk about was mentoring. Luckily, in your crew right now, you do have a few people that are working with me on some of these mentoring testing activities, I guess you could say, because all of these are different than what other open source projects run for mentoring, and we're trying them out. One of the things that in building of these programs, I've taken a look at is your time investment. In most mentoring programs, time is usually the number one reason why people don't do it. You just don't have it, or you don't have the time to devote to one person, etc. So these programs were created with that in mind. One of them is Mentors on Demand, which is our Meet Our Contributors series once a month. It's very similar to office hours. A bunch of contributors get on the call. We do a live stream on YouTube, and people ask questions via the Meet Our Contributors Slack channel or Twitter. Questions have ranged from what's your favorite color to how'd you get into open source, why Kubernetes, why is my end-to-end test not running, why is my test flaking, really just anything across the board. This is for new and current contributors alike. So if you'd like to get involved with that, let me know. We do have 2 slots available for the next 2 that we're doing, which is the first Wednesday of every month. Another one that I wanted to talk to you about was group mentoring. This is going to ideally be a self-service group mentoring where you spin up these groups, and these people would be having the same goal. So the goal would be the next level. So for instance, we're running a test right now that's wrapping up, and we took 10 people who are all current members that wanted to be a reviewer in their SIG, and we paired them with 1 mentor for every 4 persons, and we set them up with different communication platforms and things like that helped them be successful. And right now we're going to have at least 50% of them move on to their owners file, their respected owners files, which is really good for a test. And I really believe that there's a lot of peer mentoring concepts that are involved with this group mentoring idea. Sean Sullivan with CLI is actually going to be our next guinea pig for a new contributor to members group. And that's going to be really cool. So ideally what we're doing here is giving people workshops and in a very elongated time frame, so between 2 and 3 months at their own self-pace, because the 2 to 3 months is what our community membership guidelines require for most of the levels. So it's just pretty much a self-paced, semi-structured learning environment, and it's not one-to-one. It would be 1 to, say, like 3 to 4 people. And then we're also proposing a buddy program, the name TBD, but the buddy program itself comes from GopherCon, and GopherCon assigns buddies to people who are first-time GopherCon attendees. So we're just taking this as like in a longer form pretty much, and we're doing a one-time one-on-one session with a buddy, and that buddy is a level higher than you, and you can either pair program, do code review sessions, AMA, whatever you want to do in that 1 hour, but it's only a 1 hour one-time deal. So we're testing that within the next 2 weeks, so that should be really cool, and more information about that shortly. And then I know Slack maintenance Slack is a very hot topic with our crew right now. But I wanted to talk about Slack maintenance because we are onboarding a serious amount of people via Slack right now. The last 30 days, it's 2,000 people, which means that our Slack instance now has 34,000 people. So we have created Slack guidelines. There's Slack admins if you want to join that, if you need anything. Feel free. But we just wanted to let you know you should probably start pinning things to some of these channels because that might help you, things like your charter, your meeting notes, your agendas. And then last but not least, and then I swear I'm done with this rant, user office hours. We need more folks to help us answer questions and field questions from that. And we're fielding questions from Stack Overflow, the user office hours Slack channel, and occasionally Twitter. And then that's it for me. Again, if you have any other feedback for us, want to get involved in any of these other programs, reach out via our mailing list, our Slack channel, Pigeonelle, get to me however you need, and I'd love to help out.
Thank you very much, Paris. Are there any questions from the group with regards to the Contribex updates? Going once, going twice, hearing none. Thank you very much, Paris. That was very important. Thank you for appearing second time, and we finally made it through. So thanks very much for the update.
No, thank you very much.
We will be now moving to Antoine, and Antoine.
Hi. So hello, everyone. I'm here to advertise about this new working group that we've created. The goal is to move the apply functionality from kubectl to the server side. This is a pretty significant effort, which is going to last for multiple quarters and multiple versions of Kubernetes, we think. So please, if you're interested in working on that, join. I will include the link in the notes later. I don't have my machine right now, so I'll include the link. Please join if you wanna participate. The SIG CLI is probably going to be interested in the work for multiple reasons. Since we are moving the code out of kubectl. Sorry. Since we're moving the code out, we are going to deprecate many verbs on the server side. We're going to deprecate the patch, for example, the SMP. We're probably going to change the way edit work. Many of these endpoints are going to be deprecated. And so if you're using them, please let us know. We want to know if this is going to impact people. What am I missing?
Nothing other than it's going to, especially the strategic merge patch.
Yeah, the strategic merge patch is going to disappear, hopefully.
So it's not going to happen for, like
yeah, I was going to say,
for multiple releases. There should be an alpha for the server-side apply. It's going to be a separate endpoint. So initially, apply is not going to be affected. In fact, the current apply won't be affected for multiple releases.
Yeah.
But this is a heads up. It's going to be an extra endpoint, this server-side apply. And so we'll keep SIG CLI up to date as we make progress. Eventually, this is going to have, as Antoine said, significant impact on kubectl, but not in the near term.
Are you folks working on a KEP for this? Because this is exactly the type of effort that we created the KEP process for, where there's a big change that needs to be coordinated across a lot of different SIGs that's going to have a large impact on a lot of the community. And so you're saying it's going to do this, it's going to do that. Having something written down that lays out exactly what it is, making sure that there's clear before folks start writing code, I think seems to be appropriate for a change that has this wide ranging of an impact.
Yeah, that's a good point. We were wondering if we needed one, so that's confirming. Thank you.
Yeah,
I think this is like a KEP, and I think, you know, as you get the details down, you know, this is definitely the type of thing that SIG architecture is appropriate to bring stuff to.
They're already aware of it.
No, I mean, it was already presented in SIG architecture, but not as a KEP, and it wasn't in a formal thing that could be approved. It's, you know, with some of Daniel's early work describing this stuff, and that's still very far from a spec that's ready to be implementable. So I think there's still quite a bit of groundwork here before code can start being written on this.
Yeah, from the short discussion that we had yesterday, the person that are involved in the work group, we had a short discussion. What are the requirements? What do we want to get? The KEP was brought up for the discussion and was considered to be written.
Which KEP is it? I haven't seen it.
No. We haven't wrote any.
Okay.
Yeah. It was more, we only had a kickoff discussions around the topics. Yeah. What kind of formal stuff we need to get handled for this thing to work. We had a discussion, rough timeline for the future, and we also agreed that initially this will be developed in a future branch, and so that we don't have to worry about the parity with Kubernetes, and that will at least take some time to get this thing properly set up, and actually when we can start cranking some code. And once, as Daniel mentioned, once he's sufficiently happy with the code to call it alpha, we will merge this into the main Kubernetes repo. And
so again, I mean, you're focusing on the code and the process. I think there's a bunch of work that needs to be done before you even start writing code in a feature branch. Because once code is written, people feel attached to it. They don't want to change it. And so we really need to explore the space. And I wouldn't view these things as process or formality. This is really a decision-making process to make sure that all the needs are taken care of, that everybody's in the loop, so that you don't get surprises later on. Because the last thing we want to see is somebody write a bunch of code in a feature branch only to find like, whoa, you made some assumption over here that invalidates a whole ton of work that folks have done. So this is really about communication and making sure that decisions don't get relitigated once they're made. And so I think a lot of the ways that API machinery has worked in the past has been to sort of do stuff, not tell anybody, and then everybody else picks up the pieces. I mean, maybe that's being a little unfair and a little aggressive, but that's the way it feels to a lot of folks outside of API machinery. I really want to make sure that this particular effort doesn't go anyway.
Yeah, these are good points. We're going to have to change many things, especially from the API machinery perspective. And so we definitely want people to know far in advance that they're going to have to change some things, right?
And if we go through an effort to really communicate this well, there's going to be sort of limited staining for people to come in at the last minute and derail things. And so I think it's really about doing a little bit of legwork at the start to make sure that the rest of the process moving forward is a lot smoother.
Well, the most important thing is that from the short discussion that we had so far, it will take some significant amount of time to actually implement the core functionality, and then probably similar amount of time to move it forward by introducing gradually to kubectl commands, and eventually actually fully replacing. But that's another thing that will happen in a release or two.
Yeah, no, and nobody's saying that it's going to happen in release two, and that's another reason for the KEP is to be able to set an effort that's going to stretch across multiple releases. So a KEP is beyond a single release. It's really an effort that's going to take a lot of time, and this fits exactly into that type of thing. And then also, as this stuff incrementally shows up in multiple releases, we can talk about in the KEP, what are the things that got done in this release, and then what is the overarching plan for how everything fits together and where things are going, which really brings a lot of context to the release notes. And it also becomes a huge plus when it comes to writing the end user documentation for features, because that also has lagged, because things are, like we forgot to document that, you could use, specific labels in the downward API, because nobody wrote anything down. The code just got written, and then boom, it gets ignored until somebody asks for the feature, and you're like, oh, it's already there. So we really need to make sure we communicate this stuff well.
And Joe, I don't know that I heard you mention it, but effectively KEPs replace design proposals. And so I think this SIG
it's a more structured design proposal.
This SIG is not unfamiliar with design proposals. And so just think of everything that you would have been asked to do for a design proposal is basically asking you to do a KEP with a little bit more structure and a little bit, we're trying to iterate on that to have the better process to communicate, to take some of the deficiencies of the previous design proposal process in place.
Yeah, and I think the other part of it is that design proposals, you're like, boom, it's a design proposal. Is it approved? It is in progress. So we didn't have a lot of metadata around that, right? That, you know, if you look in the design proposals directory, there's like a gazillion things. Who knows what's current and what's not and what's abandoned, right? That's just a total pile of markdown. And then the other thing is that those things weren't well communicated. So I think I want to see us, you know, as we have big changes like this, we should be sending out pointers to these things to Kubernetes devs so that everybody's aware that this is coming down the pike and they have a chance to actually, like, they can't say I wasn't warned, right? You know, and I think we don't have that process around design proposals right now.
Is my understanding correct? That means that the KEPs will allow us to have sort of up-to-date design proposals versus what's actually in the code. Are we targeting that as well with the KEPs?
Yeah, so the goal is that, you know, for at least, you know, cross-ranging efforts, we want to be able to document these things similar to RFCs or PEPs. I mean, you know, everybody, you know, there's Rust RFCs. Every community has their own way of doing this stuff. The goal out of this is to make these things, you know, to host them on a website so that they're more discoverable. There's SEO. People find these things when they're doing, when they're part of the contributor community and developing things. Beyond that, I think if there's a change that is sort of scoped within a SIG, it's up to that SIG to decide whether they want to use that process internally or not. I think when we start seeing stuff that really cuts across SIG, that's the places where I think, you know, folks like me are going to be like, hey, we really should take this stuff more seriously.
Okay. Thanks very much, Joe, for the explanation.
Sorry, it's impassioned. I'm sorry. I'm just like, I really want to see us get better at this.
No. That's perfectly fine. I actually needed that one myself as well. I've heard about KEPs a lot of time, but I think that discussion that we had just now helped me understand the process even better.
Yeah, and if there's things we can do to improve the process, if the templates suck, whatever, give us feedback. I consider that process still beta. We're still working on making sure that we provide all the features that really help motivate this. And so that's stuff that I'm actively working on.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. That's it.
Okay. So we have the server side ready. Juan, can you give us the update on the printers, the topic that we're discussing over the past several times usually?
Sure. So yeah, basically over the past few SIG meetings, we've been introducing a design proposal for printers.
I agree with that. I think he's right.
It's the entire printer stack in kubectl. So there should be a link to the proposal on the agenda. And so quickly to go over it, the gist is to tackle this in multiple stages by introducing essentially structs that would hold flag values for the different types of printers that there are in kubectl. So we've identified 5 different types of printers, ranging from template, custom columns, name and success, and JSON YAML, and then human-readable.
Yes, we need
so basically, the first stage would be to introduce these structs, which we've been doing over the past week. And so there's a few that have merged and 2 that are in the process of. So the next step on this would be, once all of these merge, we would basically provide an all-encompassing struct that commands would then use to be able to essentially interact with and obtain a printer. So the way that would work is the all-encompassing struct would essentially aggregate all of the other structs, and it would abstract the logic of figuring out, given a set of flags from a command, what printer is best suited to handle the output for that command. So all commands would do is simply instantiate it, set any additional options they need, then call a toPrinter method, and then the toPrinter method would figure everything out, and a command would end up with a printer that knows how to print whatever the command ends up giving it. So the last step on there would be to sweep the code base afterwards and tackle any sections in the code base that also make use of flags but are not necessarily commands to also use this pattern. So the goal is to have basically every portion of the code base that depends on flag usage and flag values using this pattern to obtain a printer. So the human readable printer PR is currently in progress. There were some design decisions that had to be thought over since basically the human readable printer is mainly used in the get command. There's a few changes that need to be considered with the get command once or after this is introduced in order to wire this printer to that command. And so aside from that, I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. If not, then basically we should be progressing with this within the next week and hopefully have all of these pieces implemented in the near future.
Before we jump to the question, there's one more important item that I want to point out, is that as soon as we have the mechanism in place and we have the sample commands wired with the new printers, we will be writing a documentation for all the command authors, as well as the in the long run plugin authors, to explain how to properly use this mechanism so that we have a consistent way throughout the entire kubectl with regards to printing objects, depending on whatever user decided to pass to the command. Okay, are there any questions with regards to the printers? Okay, hearing none. Thanks very much, Juan. The next topic is mine, actually. It is about the generators in kubectl. So back in the days, when we created a kubectl run command, we embedded a lot of logic inside of the run command. We had a discussion 2 weeks ago or before that, that probably kubectl run is currently overloaded with the vast opportunities how to create any different kinds of resources. And to be honest, it is currently almost impossible to figure out what a kubectl run command will create for you, depending on the flag combination, the server version, and these two are the most important. And what we would like to do, and we discussed this topic in the long run, is that we could deprecate all the generators that are under the cover kubectl run and mimic Docker run command in such a way that kubectl run would only create a pod the way you specified it, so that it is logically identical to a Docker run command. As a replacement for kubectl run to be able to create whatever resource that you care about, is we're proposing to move towards kubectl create, name the resource that you want to create, whether that will be a job, cron job, a deployment, a pod, replication controller, stateful set, whatever else you can come up with. The kubectl create will be the road to go with. So that will be from a user point of view. From the implementation point of view, the generators that are behind the kubectl run are not typed. They literally hold the parameters that are passed through the run command as a map interface, as a map of string interface objects, which means that we lose the type information about the flag that is being passed to the command. With the change to kubectl create subcommands, each generator is targeted specifically at its own command, and we can fully embrace the part of strong typing and the Go language. And this is what we currently do with all the kubectl create subcommands that we already have. And actually, the majority of resources already have a proper kubectl create subcommands. In the further long run, Philip discussed a topic that we will be able to dynamically create resources based on the resources available on the server. But for that, there's an open proposal. I will be talking, hopefully, about this a little bit more during the face-to-face meetings during KubeCon in Europe, that we will be holding several. So hopefully we'll be able to move the proposal a little bit further down the road. Are there any questions? That's basically.
I think this is a big topic, and it's an arbitrarily deep pool. I agree, like Run, I think we can all agree Run is just like kind of a mess. And one of the problems with it is, like, it's intended to be like this easy, you don't know what you're doing way to access Kubernetes APIs. But then if all the flags and all the complexity we add, you have to really, really, really know what you're doing. So it kind of loses the validity of that argument for all the other flags. Because at that point, you should probably know what you're doing and use one of the generator subcommands. I think the generators in general are something we really need to think about. And there's two things we probably want to discuss. I do think they're very useful. I've used them myself when the documentation is a little bit hard to understand for certain things or whatnot. You can just get something up and running. You can see how it looks. You can see how it works. You can poke at it a little bit and then backwards figure out what you need to do when the other resources aren't available. So that's really useful. What I do wonder is if creating the resource is the right thing to do, or if we're really rethinking generators, if we want to move away from just creating the resources into just creating the config and piping that to something that creates the resource, to have a more consistent tooling chain and have interoperability between different workflows. Some of the questions there are going to be around, do you need like a TTY or these sorts of things? It may impact that, right? And it may mean we need to make changes to our other tool chains to support, or to our other tools to support what the generators do today. The other thing Maciej mentioned was how we support version skew, how we support extensibility, and how we have a maintainable code base. There's a lot of ways we could do this that make all those things much more, much better. I think it's a matter of coming up with which ones we think are best. We can do it a schema-based approach where it's metadata on the schema that exposes certain flags and then populates templates. We could do a sub-resource-based approach where a request body, a specialized request body that contains the flags is exposed and does the business logic. We could potentially explore a gRPC-based approach where we publish a service, gRPC service, that takes protocol buffer requests and puts the flags in those. But I think from a high level, it breaks down to either we create, if it's done on the client side, we publish a schema and there's just one generator piece of code that can look at a generic schema and then figure out what it needs to do, or move the whole thing server side and expose it that way. Those are both big things that need to be thought through. So there's definitely some work there, but I don't think we want to invest like cleaning up our generators or investing serious energy into the existing generators until we've really thought that through.
Yeah, I definitely agree that the server-side approach would be the way to go with, because in the long run, that will also make the creating a resources that are registered through aggregated API servers or resources that are CRDs will make them consumable by the client more easily, whether versus the current approach where it is hard, or you just need to do it manually by creating a YAML definition of the resource that you want to have. Cleaning the kubectl run is more like a tech debt that I'm seeing that we should pay to the community. It is currently overbloated, and we should slowly stop adding new stuff to it. And I personally slowly starting to do this so that there's no new generators introduced to the kubectl run command, but rather we will be slowly preventing from new stuff appearing there, and in the long run deprecating it, so that we will be able to cut the feature it provides to just a single kubectl run pod.
Yeah, I agree with all that. We can start by just saying we're not accepting features for kubectl run.
Yes.
It's frozen.
For the kubectl create subcommands, I totally agree with you, Phil, that I really like the generators, but the ones that are under create subcommands, not the ones that are in the run command, because of what I mentioned earlier. So the create subcommands is a natural thing that will happen if we for people so that they can interact with the platform. I've spent numerous hours talking with OpenShift evangelists, and what they always force me to do is to provide a flow for whatever I come up with a solution that will be purely CLI based or UI if possible. But if I can come up with a series of commands that I can achieve this, whatever I told them, what is the solution to their problem, they were happy. But if there's no solution, then they were saying, well, then a regular users will be struggling with just that problem. That's why I think the create subcommands will be a good replacement until we get to the point where we have the generic create command. And the biggest reason is that the generic create will require us to propose significant changes to how the schema is described on the server, which in turn requires some cross discussion with SIG API machinery on what are the changes that we require for the generic create command. So the generic create will take a little bit more time, but it is something that we should be discussing in the meantime as well.
Yeah, well, I think that makes sense. As part of kubectl apply, moving server side, we need to actually re-architect the schema for resources anyway. So I don't think we should block that on this clearly, but it is the same area, it's the same code base and the same area of ownership. So we could probably as a follow-up say, hey, we want to augment the new schema we create for apply with this sort of stuff. Let's, I'll be at KubeCon Copenhagen too. I think some other people will be, Manchi certainly. So maybe we can grab a room for 45 minutes and a whiteboard or something. And
Definitely that's worth doing. And we'll probably have to come up with some kind of cap from what you mentioned earlier, because that will require cross-SIG agreement. But
yeah, we'll definitely come up with a cap.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Are there any topics, questions, suggestions with regard to the generators or generally create commands in kubectl? Okay, hearing none. Juan, can you give us an update on the plugins proposal and the work that we've done in the meantime from the last call that we had on the plugins?
Sure. So in the last SIG meeting, we briefly discussed the current design of plugins as well as potential new design that basically could resolve the shortcomings that have been identified so far with the design. So currently, kubectl invokes a plugin binary, and it passes flags to it through environment variables. So this set of flags consists of global flags, global kubectl flags, as well as any flags that the plugin requested via the plugin.yaml file. So basically, this design ends up pretty much it ends up in a stream of potentially never-ending patches as new flags are identified or specific cases need to be addressed because kubectl did not pass information that the plugin was expecting. So if you turn to the document linked on the agenda, we have a proposal for a new design which somewhat mirrors the design of Git plugins. So essentially what an author of a plugin would have is an executable binary, which they would place on your path. And basically, so long as that executable has the prefix in its file name of kubectl dash, then kubectl would be able to find it. And so the way this would work is to discover plugins, a user would type in kubectl and then a subcommand, and if that subcommand is not part of the root command set, then kubectl looks for that in the path of the user and attempts to execute that file. And so the main difference here is when the file is executed, all environment variables, all flags, all arguments are passed to the plugin without any filtering or mediation done on kubectl's part. So this would basically address any potential shortcomings, any raw information that maybe the plugin was expecting that did not get passed through. It would also be predictable in that so long as you drop in a binary with the correct file name anywhere on the path, you're immediately able to use it or discover it. So this leads us to naming conventions. Basically, I believe that this approach would simplify plugin distribution, plugin installation, because you no longer have a directory that has to live somewhere, and that directory has to contain a specific file, and that specific file has to basically identify the plugin, and it has to basically describe the plugin, but rather kubectl would infer the name from the file name of the plugin, and then the plugin itself would take care of handling any flags that are passed via arguments, any information that is provided via environment variables. So the plugin itself would have full control over basically what it does with what the user provides. This leads to an outcome that allows plugin authors to sort of inject themselves into subcommands. So if they have specific behavior for a resource in a particular subcommand, then they are able to do that with this design by basically filtering on specific behavior and making their plugin active only if certain parameters for a kubectl command are passed. So the next section is flag argument handling. So basically what I mentioned, plugins are free to handle arguments as they choose. This also leads to a potential need to provide a utility package or a utility repo, which would essentially, so it wouldn't be an API, but it would essentially provide a set of common tools that would be needed by most, if not all, plugins that interact with the Kube API server. So it would take care of, for example, parsing a kubeconfig file from the user, obtaining a REST client, or handling global flags, for example. So So I've included in the proposal document a few examples or at least a few short descriptions of how other systems tackle plugin design. So Git plugins mimics the design proposed fairly closely. Helm mimics the old design a bit in that it also requires a directory to exist in a particular location, and in that directory a file has to exist that describes the plugin. Cloud Foundry takes a slightly different approach in that it actually provides an API for a plugin, and essentially doesn't force users, but it encourages users and plugin authors to go through these API calls to obtain very specific information about very specific resources on their pillar server. So I feel like of all of these three, in my opinion, while all three provide use cases for fairly complex behavior, the Git plugin model would, in my opinion, would be the one that would be the easiest to install, the easiest to distribute, and the easiest to document. So if there's any questions at this time, I'd like to answer.
Yeah, Matt already volunteered that he has a ton of questions on the chat. So go ahead, Matt.
I have a comment and two questions. The first is I want to give a little bit maybe more detail to the Helm structure here. So Helm plugins have the ability to, there's a lot of static. Is it just me who's hearing that? No, okay. There's one. Helm plugins have the ability to kind of hook into something. And so there are places where it provides a default. For example, Helm fetch http:// something. It says, okay, HTTP, HTTPS, we have a default for. But somebody can come in and change the scheme. And so you can say Helm fetch S3:/ and whatever the rest of the URI is. And Helm says, hey, I don't know how to handle S3. I'm going to go see if there's a plugin that knows how to handle it. And there actually is a plugin you can install. And if you've got it, Helm drops down to the plugin for that, passes it the information, so it can plug into things along the way, so to speak, with kind of a hook-like mechanism that says, hey, we may not implement, if it's not the default, you can go off and plugins can go implement that. And so there's a complexity there in the way it works. The Helm plugin YAML file doesn't just say here's stuff about it, but it also says there's hooks. When you install a plugin or when certain events fire with inside of Helm, you can hook into that and do things. And Helm will reach out. And so that goes beyond kind of the Git plugins, which are Git space some name, and it looks for Git dash in the pattern for it, because it gives you the ability to actually plug into the execution along the way and do things. And in the Helm 3 design, we're actually looking to expand the use of that into more places based on requests we've had during the Helm 2 cycle. So that's one of the things about Helm plugins. That actually gets me to kind of my two questions. What's the difference under the Git style plugins between me having some binary that somebody installs and a plugin to kube control? Like, what's the benefit to having a plugin under the Git style of things?
Yeah, so basically, and that's a good point. Basically, the main gist of this design would be that plugins would be able to run as standalone binaries if users so choose to do so. But one advantage I could think of that would be provided by running these as subcommands of kube control, for example, would be that kube control could still pass relevant and specific information via environment variables, for example, to that binary that it would otherwise have to figure out on its own, such as the location of kube config, or if a proxy is needed to access the API server and what that host name is.
Or authentication is needed to access the server, and that will be still part of the somehow kubectl or plugins that will allow this.
Okay, and I did have one more question real quick.
Sure.
And I'm asking because I don't think Carolyn is here this week, and she brought it up last week. So there were places where folks like the service catalog, and I can imagine others would want to take over commands like get and describe to say, okay, in my case, maybe I want to describe things differently in a special way or provide other information. So I could do something like kube control get some object that's instituted as a CRD. And then the desired was to say, hey, we want to be able to override the output so we can make it relevant or visually display a little bit differently than some default. In this kind of Git plugin setup, how would you approach solving for that kind of situation?
Yeah, we intentionally left that bit for the discussion because we're hoping to open a proposal to replace the old one and start the discussion over there, because we're not 100% sure whether the approach of, yes, I want to allow override all the core commands, or we don't allow overriding any, is not, we're not seeing, there are lots of pros and cons for each of the approach, but none of the approach currently stands out significantly. But like I said, to address a little bit more with the use case that you want to override the get bit, we were imagining that for certain cases, you would be able to extend not just the main commands, but also subcommands of the command. So in case of kubectl get my particular foo resource, you would write a plugin with the name kubectl-get-foo, which would replace the behavior for kubectl-get-foo. But nothing like that is set in stone. So we're open to discussion on this topic. So that's definitely something that will have to be addressed, but we don't know the answer yet.
That would impact how we designed our commands. Like all of a sudden, whether something is a flag or an argument or like a positional argument determines whether it can be overridden by a plugin or not. That this is a bad thing. It's just an interesting property of this.
It's basically the scope of problems when we open the ability to override the core commands is pretty big, and we just need to figure out all the pros and cons and gather some input on what is desired to actually go with one or the other approach.
Do we know how we'd even differentiate between this core command takes arguments? Like, I guess we could do that in Cobra, I guess, check whether arguments are used, and if arguments are used, then you can't overwrite it or something like that. The way to do that. Matt, you talked about some stuff Helm does with plugins. How much of that is bespoke to Helm's use case? How much is that just generally useful stuff? Would that be useful as a library, like general CLI tooling for a plugin framework or something?
It might be useful as general tooling. The way it's written today is it's part of Helm. It is a sub package, I want to say, within Helm that's handled separately, but that could probably be broken out and refactored into a common library.
Okay.
The plugin handling is maybe more similar to something like the hook system in some programming languages that says, hey, before we fire off the default, or in the case where it isn't our default, we're going to go look to see what else is out there, what other implementations are out there. It kind of follows that pattern, and folks seem to like that pattern so far.
You like register callbacks then, or that sort of thing?
You basically register callbacks, yeah. And the callbacks are registered via the plugin YAML file for Helm. The other interesting thing that we're discussing for Helm 3 is actually embedding a Lua engine, so you can write Lua plugins in a cross-platform way.
Yeah, I heard about that. It's interesting. I don't know that much about Lua.
It's designed to be embedded. There are multiple implementations as Go libraries. And so we're JavaScript, getting all the cross-platform for all the things you might want to cross-compile to can be a little bit of a pain. There are just pure Go implementations, multiple of them. And that's one of the things that caught our attention, was the ability to easily do that as a plugin language, because it's designed to be embedded.
My initial reaction of a couple. One is, I think we want to talk about like the direction of kube control for plugins, because there's two kind of architectures. One is like a very composable Unix style focused commands doing focused things architecture. And this kind of is the opposite of that, right? Where in both cases, we want to foster is the ability to develop independent pieces of the system and have folks publish them and then them to be used together. With Unix style, everyone just publishes their own, they end up on your path, and then that's how you use them. With this plugin style, I think this is a composition-based approach where it says, okay, we're just going to unify all the things people publish under this one command structure.
I think that actually gets to the why of the Helm plugins work the way they do. Is we like the Unix philosophy or the Linux philosophy of piping one thing into the next, so to speak, and we, having just all kinds of arbitrary subcommands doesn't always necessarily make sense, because if you could just pipe them together, is there a reason to have them as a plugin, right? Why have that composition-based approach if you don't need it? And so plugins are targeted at cases where it's the ability to extend the function of Helm rather than just add a whole new functionality that could be its own binary.
Right. I guess you could argue that most of the problem we're trying to solve with plugins is the inability to extend it using kind of native mechanisms. And having, like printing, for instance, if you wanted to overwrite printing, it's because we didn't have a native way of defining that. I do like the idea of keeping it as simple as possible and adding complexity later. Like, as long as we're not making it simple in a way that prevents us from extending it and augmenting it to solve problems later, just solve the smallest problem possible, I guess. It's my gut. Cool, and so this would go, the proposal here is to take this beta, and then that would be a relatively strong commitment on our part then that we're gonna.
I would rather not do any commitment on where we want to move with this. Definitely beta is not a goal at this point in time. Okay. I'm not sure how far we will be able to go with it. This is more to kick off the discussion currently. There has been a lot of discussions over the issues, over the PRs, which are trying to fix the current plugin mechanism. So it's rather to kick off discussion, to move this forward to something that will be more reliable, simple at the same time, but with the possibility to extend further down the road, like you said. So that will be the current approach that we would like to have. The idea is to replace the old mechanism. This probably means that this will live together for a short while, and then we will entirely ditch the old mechanism, and hopefully with some feedback we'll be able to further expand the current mechanism. And as one of the inputs for the current approach is what Carolyn said last time, was that they literally end up parsing all the flags by themselves, which leads us to the current approach. And Service Catalog being the biggest consumers for the plugins in what we discussed is probably the one of the important inputs.
Yeah, I think this is clearly better than the other approach. The other thing wasn't buying us that much. I think we had the complexity of Matt's approach suggested for Helm, which is intended to do more powerful things, but we weren't actually doing more powerful things, so it's kind of a mess. So that sounds good. I'm glad we're moving forward with this.
Yeah. Thank you very much, folks. We're very way over time. So I'll probably move the Manji topic over to the next meeting in 2 weeks. Thank you very much. Sorry for the overtime, and see you in 2 weeks.